Very many times we find ourselves in some spiritual situations that uh, are not so pleasant as we might want it to be. Sometimes we want to seek God like we have never done before. Many times when we have the opportunity, we are not able to utilize it. Take for example, when you are in school and you have busy schedules, you long for periods to fellowship with God. But perhaps you go on vacation, or there is a compulsory break as there is now at this time in the world. You find yourself struggling to pray, struggling to fellowship with God. You find yourself sometimes not necessarily because you don't have time, and not necessarily because you do not have the resources to or the freedom, but many times our own laziness, or that we find ourselves spiritually weak. When you find yourself in spiritually down times and situations where you struggle to fellowship with God, the question is, how do you get out? How do you receive help? How do you become strong? How do you maintain spiritual stability? How do you come about receiving help? That's what we want to talk about today. We must realize that the first thing we should know is that it is not God's will for anybody to be weak. It is not God's will for anybody to have issues spiritually. It's not God's will for you to struggle. But then what is God's will? And how does God's will come into play in helping you? Because sometimes even the scriptures that we know cannot help us. We are not able to receive help from the things that are around us. Here is a little advice and counsel to help you get back on your feet when you find yourself spiritually weak. Number one, remember that you are a man. Maybe you need to hear that again. Remember that you are a man. Men are known for weakness. No matter how helped you may have been, a time will come that your humanity will tell on you. A time will come that your strength will fail you. The book of Isaiah chapter 40 verse 28 to 31 tells us that even the young men faint and the youths will utterly fall. But there is one who does not fall. There is the Lord, who is ever strong and consistent. God is able to help us. He is able to give us strength. So he says that they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. How does that apply to us in states of spiritual need? Is that we must realize that we are humans, and as human beings, our humanity brings us to a point where we must acknowledge that we need divine help. So if you have never been to a point where you feel spiritually weak and helpless, then perhaps you are not a man. But if you are a man, it must come. The proof that you are a man is that at some point your humanity will begin to show up. The human nature has a way of telling us that we are human beings and that we need divine help. So whenever you find yourself spiritually weak, you cannot bring yourself to pray, you cannot bring yourself to study the word of God, you cannot bring yourself to have a long-term conversation with God. Know for sure that you are only showing symptoms of humanity. The second thing to know is that God is not weak. God is not spiritually down as you are.
We're declaring this tonight. Spirit